Amazing. Okay, so you have myself, Autumn, and Zoe hosting today's webinar on recording analysis. We're going to get stuck in. Okay, so hopefully you can all see the presentation in front of you and see here that the number one question the WOX gets asked is how do you get over the cringe factor of listening to your own recordings? Unfortunately, our answer might be a bit disappointing, which is that we don't. That is true. No, I don't think you can ever get over the sound of your own voice. No one loves to hear it back. It never sounds quite like what you think it's going to. But I think I don't know. I don't want to speak for Zoe, but I definitely got used to it over time, and I found that the positive outcomes from the analysis and the feedback you get can kind of turn that into motivation. And for me, that eventually outweighed the cringe. Keyword there is eventually. It's not to say that it became enjoyable, but it became slightly less miserable and a little bit more focused on the outcomes, which I found a little bit kind of helpful to motivate me. So I was, times where I'd get feedback from rowers and coaches, the more positive that feedback got, or the more it would change, so I could see that I was improving. That became really motivating for me. I don't know what you would say, Zoe.
I mean, I had to listen to a bunch of recordings to pick some recordings for today's webinar. And that was uncomfortable in itself. It was uncomfortable, but it was also quite funny because they're all basically nearly 10 years old. So they're all old recordings.
Wild.
And it was quite funny to listen back to them. And there was also large periods of time where I was playing recordings of training outings where all I could hear was me laughing. So I was obviously quite an unserious cox in my day.
I think that's really interesting. Like, I think everyone that listens back to their recordings will probably be a little bit surprised by what they hear. There's probably a lot of stuff that you say that you don't even realize you've said out loud. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. But we'll go over all of that. Okay, so that kind of covers that question. Sorry if that answer was disappointing, but it's true. At least you know you're not alone. Um, so the objectives of today's webinar are that hopefully you'll leave this call knowing that we all hate the sound of our own voice, even someone like Zoe. We hope that you'll feel a bit more equipped to structure and implement your own analysis process. So you're listening to your own recordings. We'd like you to feel inspired to at least start listening to your own recordings if you haven't already, and hopefully you'll feel empowered to explore self-analysis outside of when you're asked to submit recordings by coaches. Sometimes you won't be asked, sometimes you will, but taking that initiative to listen to your own recordings in your own time can really go a long way. And hopefully you'll enjoy listening to Zoe's coxing, and hopefully you'll feel like you can join in to the analysis that we do at the end of this session. So it won't just be me and Zoe talking, we'll invite all of you to join in on that too, get you started. So before we get to the recording, let's go over why analysis of your recordings is so important. So let's put it simply, it is the best way to learn. However much we might not like it, it is the best way. You'll If you're in a regular routine of listening to your own recordings, or other people's recordings actually for that matter, you will start to notice your strengths, your areas to work on, your little nuances, what makes you unique, what makes you kind of click with your crews, all of that kind of stuff will start to really shine through. The more you do it, you'll notice your own style as a cox, which can be really empowering, as we've talked about. Um, You'll also probably start to notice maybe some things you don't quite like to hear. So some of the habits that you might have developed. So that might be words that you use as filler words that kind of creep in that you didn't even realize you were saying, but nearly every other phrase is ended with good or yep or something like that. I know I was guilty of that myself. But the more you hear it, the more it annoys you. Actually, you might be able to kind of check yourself in the boat a little bit more and kind of get rid of them. So it's not nice, but it does help. But not only will you identify things that you don't like, you'll also identify things that you do. And actually, it can be difficult to listen out for those things, but really try to be aware of the things that are having a positive impact on the boat, the things that are working, and make sure that you keep doing those things. So yeah, it's not all negative. Sometimes it is also thinking about your strengths and what you add to your crew. Is there anything you have to add to that, Zoe, actually, before we move in on the why?
No,
Love that. Cool. Okay, how? So it's not always in everyone's routine. So we're going to give you some ideas of kind of how to implement this into your own training. It shouldn't take too much effort. So hopefully this will help. We'd suggest you start with just once a week. A 2 minute recording that you listen to and write up some simple notes on is a really good way to start, and it doesn't take up too much of your time. Keep the sections short and manageable so you don't overload yourself. There's nothing worse than trying to listen to an hour every single day because that just gets too much. You've already done an hour and a half on the water. You don't need to listen to the whole thing back again. Just pick a section that you think is an honest representation of your coxing in that session, timestamp it, listen to that, and just analyze that. Do it in small, manageable chunks. It's a lot easier that way. Um, Also, communicate with your coaches, ask them for your input. If it's not something that your coaches are proactively offering, you can ask for that. You can ask for them to give you feedback on your recordings. You can ask to schedule in some time for a one-on-one. Don't be afraid to ask. Um, Also, doesn't have to be a coach, it could be another cox in your club. I'm a really big kind of pusher of this, which is that sharing knowledge is really powerful. Don't gatekeep things that you've learned in the same way that you wouldn't want someone to gatekeep something if you wanted to know the answer to a question. You'd hope they gave you their honest answer. Let's be really on it with sharing that knowledge between coxes in clubs. Ultimately, it is about creating a good habit, though. So, making sure that you are regularly taking those recordings and regularly kind of going back and listening to them. Also, going back through notes and feedback you've taken previously so that you can signpost your progress. I'll go into a little bit more depth on kind of some methods to do that so that you're not just completely overloaded with loads of words on a page that you just kind of forget over time. But getting in the habit of taking regular recordings and regularly checking in on them can really easily fit into your routine. It's just, again, yeah, it's just about getting in the habit. When you are in the boat, make sure you're taking a device with you. That's normally the number one excuse we get for why someone hasn't got a recording or doesn't have their own. If we say to someone like, what analysis have you done? It's just, oh, I forgot to take my recorder out that day. Get in the habit of having it in your toolkit so that, as important as it is to take your rigger jigger in the boat, make sure you've got a recording device. So if you're old school like us, you might have a little recording device like in the bottom left hand corner of that slide. Or if you've got a fancy new Coxbox/Coxorb, you might be able to do it on your device itself. If you want the most kind of budget friendly option, a waterproof phone case so that you can take your phone in the boat. Not only is that good for safety, so you can kind of make a call if you get in trouble, also you can take a voice recording, and it's a really easy way to store all of your recordings in one place, just on your phone. I don't have a smartwatch, don't know about you, Zoe, but apparently you can do it on those.
No, but apparently Apple Watches. I think Morgan and Erin were swearing by Apple Watches.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
That is well beyond my technical ability,
yeah.
but sure, great, love that. And the classic GoPro. If you've got a video in your filming sessions, that can be really useful. And actually mixing it up and not just having an audio recording, but having a video recording to go along with it is really valuable because not only can you hear what you're doing, you can also see the impact it's having on the crew in front of you or side on. We actually have now some new fancy mics that we've been using for content creation, but maybe they would work in the boat where they're Bluetooth, so you can have the microphone on you and a device in the launch, and then you can have live recording and input from your coaching. So your coach can be listening to you with what you're saying, and also they can be coaching and kind of not interrupting you, and you can be working a bit more cohesively as a team, and it records. So that might be quite a good little bit of technology to invest in as well if you're really looking to push that on. Um, I think that's everything on the how. Anything to add to that, Zoe?
No, I just say that, one of these dictaphones is pretty cheap. I think you can get one for 15 or 20 quid or something on
Yeah.
Amazon. So you really don't need much more than that.
Mm.
If you do have access to a GoPro, especially if you're sending recordings off for other people to listen to who weren't there, I'd say that's the gold standard. But like, let's face it, most of us don't have GoPro money. But if you do, great.
Yeah, it is useful to be able to see, especially when you're providing feedback to a Cox. It's obviously great to be able to see a change and kind of see the context in which you're coxing, but you can't always get that, and you can get just as much out of audio if you need to. Cool. Okay. So some analysis methods. So I was talking about kind of how you can store all of your feedback that you've kind of written down for yourself. There's a few ways that you can do this, and it is largely personal preference. So Some people are really big spreadsheet people. I totally get that. It can make it very visually palatable if you're tracking all of your feedback over a long period of time. You can kind of set up categories on the different areas that you want to develop in your coxing, for example, tone, clarity, steering, all of those different categories. And kind of monitor your feedback and the different bits of feedback you're getting on those areas and the improvements you're making. And you can start to notice trends. So if you're constantly getting the same bit of feedback on your steering over and over again, maybe you need to start seeking some alternative advice of how to make that change. Or it's a really good way to check things off and be like, okay, I've made that change and I moved on, and now the feedback's changed and I'm seeing different things come up, and that can be really, really satisfying. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier, seeing that notable improvement in your feedback. Doesn't have to be you're doing a good job. It might just be, well, now you're working on something different. So you obviously fix that other thing and now they're able to think about the next thing. So there's different ways you can track your improvement. And a spreadsheet is a really easy way to watch that happen. Some people are a little bit more word based rather than kind of data spreadsheet based. So you might like journaling. I normally found journaling useful for personally post session, just kind of word vomit everything that I got out of that session, maybe some technical point that really worked well, that I really liked kind of how the crew responded. So I might make a note and say, okay, that's going to work in the future. I'll keep doing that. Um, or this really didn't work, so I'm not going to do that again. And then maybe you can input some of those key points into your spreadsheet for kind of longer term keeping. So there's a way to combine them as well. Now, a personal favorite of mine is this idea of group analysis. So I think it's just really useful. If you're in a squad with lots of coxes, it's amazing to be able to share all of that knowledge. But even if there's only a couple of you, it's so powerful to share that knowledge, and it will ultimately raise everyone's game, not just the coxes, but the rowers. If you have a session, you make a technical change, you make a call that makes the boat go faster, you need to be telling the next person that might get in the boat so that they can build on that. And ultimately, it's not just about gatekeeping that so that you were the person that made that perfect change. It's making the crew better by sharing that knowledge and everyone learns from it. So yeah, in terms of technical knowledge, but also developments in what you're working on. When I was steering today, I went around this corner and I approached it this way, and it really worked. So this is something you could try in the future if you know someone's struggling. Share that knowledge. Group analysis can be so helpful. Don't assume just because you're a peer that you don't have something valuable to add to someone else's coxing. Yeah. Anything else on that, Zoe?
No, well, yes, actually, one thing I would say is I don't know if you're going to say this later, but take a few minutes to think about how you label your recordings when you store them as well,
Oh
because
yeah.
I have loads of recordings that just say either just have nothing, it just says like audio one, audio
Yeah.
two,
Like
audio
one of the ones you sent today.
like one of the ones I sent you today, or it says really weird stuff like some sort of piece at Caversham, which is extremely unhelpful. So think about
Mhm.
having some, it doesn't have to be like masses and masses, but just a little something to tickle your memory about what it is, because otherwise you'll be like me today, just dragging through things that say audio one, two, three, four, five, not having any idea what you're about to listen to.
That's so helpful. And things like Google Drive now, you can set up different folders. So you can have like a pieces folder, a technicals folder, you can have long paddles and you can separate them. So it's easier to kind of dig out what you're trying to find. Great idea. Yes, very good. That's a really good tip. I wish I'd I wish I'd done that. Yeah, nice. Okay. So the next kind of thing to touch on is goal setting. Now, I'm not going to go really deep into this because this was touched on last time we did a recording analysis webinar. So if you are really interested in goal setting and using the SMART method, go back and watch that. It is on YouTube. But I just wanted to kind of highlight, in the context of everything we've just discussed, it's really important that when you're working on your development, you are setting yourself some goals, and they need to be following this SMART method. Okay. Again, I'm not going to go into massive detail about it. You can go and check that out. But yeah, setting goals is a really crucial part of your development.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Anything on that for you, Zoe?
No,
Great.
listen back to the other recording because we did cover it, so we
Yeah.
won't
Yeah,
go
exactly.
then.
Okay. So this is the last thing before we head into Zoe's recording. So this is aimed at coaches, and I'm going to die on this hill. All right. So
There's so
when
many caps locks and so many.
So I didn't actually write this slide. This was written, I think, by
That's
either you or Morgan, but I've just
this is
kept it
how
in
we
from
think
last
about
time. It
it.
is. This is how we feel so passionately about it. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a bit in the recordings about how tone really matters. Like if something's really important, your tone needs to change to address it. I'm doing that now. Okay, so there is time to include recording analysis into your program. There are no excuses. Say it louder for the people at the back. There are no excuses. Okay, racing and training recordings require feedback. If you think it's important to analyze erg data, to look at the setup of your boat, to watch video back, to look at telemetry data, one of those essential coaching points needs to be listening to your Cox's recordings. If you want things to happen in the boat and you are a coach, you are relying on your Cox's to implement that for you. So you need to be finding out what they're sounding like. What are they saying in the boat? What improvements are they making? The interest that you're taking in your rowers needs to be equal to the interest you're taking in your Cox's. It's as simple as that. Okay. The Cox's input is very valuable, and 2 minutes recordings does the job. You can just listen to 2 minutes and get a really good picture of what your Cox is doing. Let them choose which 2 minutes. Say, send me something that is representative of your coxing. You listen to it and you provide them some valuable feedback. It doesn't have to be an hour long one-on-one session. It can be, and that's useful. It could just be 5 minutes of, okay, I listened to this and this was really good. This is what I want you to work on over the next week. If you've got a really big squad, no one's saying that you have to do that for all 15 of your coxes every single week. You might just need to split it up and choose two to do every week and just kind of rotate them around like that. But it needs to be a non-negotiable. Literally anyone can provide recording feedback. The rowers are doing it in the boat, so as a coach, you need to be doing it as well. Anything to add to that, Zoe? Okay, right. We're now going to hand over to Zoe and we're going to listen to one of her recordings and then we're all going to talk about it. I really hope you find it inspiring and that you leave this webinar feeling confident in providing feedback on yours and other people's recordings in the future. So let's get stuck in and listen to one of Zoe's recordings. I now need to just share the audio. So we're relying on my technical skills.
I think one of the things that's quite important if you do send a recording to someone who wasn't there is to give some context for it. So it
Mm.
doesn't need to be massive, but just a little bit of like, okay, I was coxing an 8. We were doing some tech work. We were focusing on this, or like these were some pieces that were, 5K long, and they were rate capped, and it was kind of in the lead up to, with Four's Head in mind, kind of thing. So it's just really useful to provide that. And also, if there was something specific that you were working on during that time period, to provide that as well. So I hope that this first recording is going to be a bit of some 5K piece.
Mhm.
This was another classic bit of my own labeling where it said something like, I think it said something like 2 times 5K piece, but that was it. There was no more information. But I
Basically.
think, given that it was recorded in January time, this would have been from our training camp that we would go on in a viz. So this was January 2016. So this is Olympic year. This crew, this was an 8. This crew was not quite the crew that raced at the Olympics, but it was the basis of that crew. It was the start. This was the start of the formation period of that crew, really. And we used to go and do this outing where we'd kind of have quite a long row to get to the start line, and then we do a 5K piece, then we turn around, then we do a 5K piece back, and then we'd still have quite a long row to get home. So it was a really, really long session, and it was rate capped usually in the sort of mid-20s, somewhere around there. But it was a real sort of slog of a session. So my aim was to try and get some energy into it. I'm not sure I achieved that, but we'll listen and then we can get some feedback on it. So I think if we listen to maybe like 90 seconds or 2 minutes or something.
Right, let's do it. Okay. I'm turning the volume right up, so I'm hoping this doesn't blow all of your speakers.
Oh dear.
It's okay, she won't be shouting straight away.
Don't cancel for those forwards. Okay, full crew, backs up. Ready, go. Yeah, building into it. Take the hull, be patient in these first few. Feel that grip in front of the pin. Yeah, good. Now big gear. Ready, go. Big gear. Big gear. Big gear. On the rise, go.
It might be clearer if you turn it down in the volume a bit,
Change.
actually.
1.5. Ready. Stay direct with it. Spoons round. Yep. Yeah, now let me feel that relaxation, knees to riggers. Go. I've got 24.5. See there? No higher. Give it that contrast every stroke. 42s and 43s on the speed. Little bit of wind against us. Let's hold this with that first inch. Go. Yeah, feel that attachment to the heel. Right in front of your riggers. Loosen into the heel. So I've got 44s, 45s on the speed. Start to push those down. Put us at 200 meters. I want that knockout punch. Check the big gear. Ready.
Oh, I've completely lost anything there.
Did you get any of that?
Yeah, most of it, but
Okay,
it went quiet at the end.
Okay, yeah, it's just when it gets louder for some reason. Um, okay, let me quickly get to this. Amazing. Okay, so what are your thoughts, Zoe? Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Um, I'll start because
Yeah,
I think you should always start with your own self.
love that.
Um, so I think it had good energy actually. Um, and I think I wasn't it wasn't over the top given that it was like rate 24. You don't want to be going completely nuts.
Mm,
But I think I was trying to get that, get some excitement into it. I thought they were relatively good sort of spaces. There was some quiet time basically, so it was allowing emphasis of calls to come through.
mm.
Um, and I stuck to relatively simple focuses, as in like I hadn't, we listened to 2 minutes. I think I'd only really talked about one or two kind of technical points.
Yeah.
I think my major thing that I didn't like and that was annoying me was that even though they probably knew that the start of the piece was at rate 24, and I said, oh, it's 24 and a half, what I should have done at that point was said, that's good, or that's fine,
Yeah.
or kind of picked out, and the same, I think later on I called some splits, but then I didn't kind of, I think if you give data, you have to quantify if it's okay,
Mm.
basically. And
Is that
especially,
good or is that, do we need to be doing more?
yeah, exactly. And I did do it later. I said, oh, the splits were creeping up a bit. So I said, oh, I can't remember what they were, 145s, 146s, let's push them down.
Mm.
So I did do it a bit, but I think I wasn't really prescriptive enough about that. And I think later on in the season, that might have been okay because actually later on in the season, everyone was pretty switched on to what speeds we kind of expected, and kind of the people knew where we should be given the conditions, etc., etc. But given that this was a relatively, this would have been a relatively, I mean, obviously these guys all rode together all the time, but the crew itself would have been reasonably scratch. I think I should have been much more prescriptive with that data, sort of qualifying any data that I gave, basically. So that I think if I had to pick one thing that I'd want to do differently, it would be that.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think that sounds reasonable. I think context is so important there, isn't it? Where there's parts of that recording where if I was listening to it and I didn't know the context and that was for kind of a novice crew or a less experienced crew in general, there's more things I would pick out as probably that weren't going to work. But actually knowing the context is that that's an Olympic year kind of formation crew. It's less important. So yeah, context is important. But shall I go through a couple of the things that I've written down?
Yeah, I think so. Then we can see.
So,
And if anyone else wants to shove stuff into the chat or
oh yeah, unmute yourself. Go.
unmute yourself.
We've allowed that to happen on this one, so
Yeah.
please make most of it because normally we don't have that function enabled. So you were saying you weren't sure if you had injected enough kind of excitement. You were interested to hear that. Straight away, I got excited because you said, let's go catch up to those fours. Like it was before you'd even built or done anything, you'd set a goal. You'd been like, that just feels like it must have incited a bit of like adrenaline and excitement in the rowers, especially if you're like mid however many pieces you were doing that day. And although you sounded really calm, that almost added to it because it's like, oh yeah, go on then. And you can just feel that intensity building and like they're probably really like revving the engines. So when you said go, they were like right there and ready. I just love the sound. I love when people say stuff like that. I think it can land really well. Um, and I also love that when you were building, you gave them a way to do it. It was really clear that the way you wanted to do it was they wanted to take the boat with them. So it wasn't just like, we're just going to go for it. It was a really calm and clear, we're going to be patient in the first few and get grip in front of the pin. And it was very obvious how you wanted them to build the boat speed. So I really liked that. And that I'm assuming that was probably much more effective than if you'd just said, okay, rate 24, go.
Yeah, and I think that was like the big gear stuff. That was what we've been working on a lot and
Mm.
worked on a lot throughout the season. And that idea, like when you're on the bike and you're using a big gear, you have to really push,
Okay.
push. Like that was the idea of that, and that's the feeling we wanted. We didn't want to just put the blades in the water and just spin through. We wanted to really grip and push. So we would talk a lot about, even when we were at high rate, about really rowing it like we're in a big gear, so we're really getting grip onto something,
Mm.
basically.
Okay, that makes so much sense because that was actually a question I had on my notes, which was like, what exactly does that mean? It makes so much sense now. I probably could have guessed that. And again, that's really important on context because if you just dropped that in to a crew that you'd never coxed before and you just said, okay, big gear, that could be interpreted in so many different ways. And you always have to be careful with calls like that. But when it's a crew you've been working with and you're talking about gear, a big gear, everyone will know what that means. But the danger of everyone kind of reacting differently could really pull a piece apart and suddenly it could become very disjointed and actually the cause had the opposite of effect. So that's just something to watch out for any coxes who are working with more kind of scratch crews on a daily basis. Make sure you're really explaining the ways that you want people to make changes, not just kind of a catchphrase that goes along with it that might make sense to you. Um, Okay, that definitely covers a few of the points that I wanted to ask about it. The tone overall, I loved. I've written that here. It sounds so clear and in control, and there's just that hint of aggression, which kind of matches what you want them to do under the water. But it's not too much that it's kind of overbuilding the excitement where they might start then, rushing the slide and kind of taking the rate up because 24 is one of those like edge rates where you can really work but also so quickly accidentally creep higher. So I feel like the way you're using your voice is very effective at keeping them right where they need to be.
Mm.
And I like that. And then when you build the intensity on the knockout punch, that has the exact effect you're hoping it to have. Your volume, your intensity of your voice increases, and then you like almost not scream, but really intensely say now. And you can just tell that the energy of the boat is going to match you on that. And I think that's really important. That's a really good example of using the tone of voice to impact what you want from the crew. I think we had a thing in the comments. So I'm just going to read that and then see what you have
Thing.
as a
And it's been
comment.
sent directly to you.
Or potentially, yes, that might be it. Um, so I'm interested to know how you might start a session like this, say within the first 20 strokes with a less experienced crew or a crew less experienced in your style or choice of words.
I'm not
So
sure I understand the question.
So I think that's what I was saying about being a little bit more wordy, maybe with your explanation.
Oh
So
yeah.
rather than saying big, so for you, you kind of just went into it and you were saying, okay, big gear, which to
Mm.
your crew made sense. But to a more scratch crew, I think before you go into the piece, you need to lay it out. Like, okay, we're going to build from paddling to 24 over 3 or 5 strokes, whatever works for your crew. And we're going to do it in this way. And I
Yeah,
think
I think
just
if it
really
was
spelling it out is the way to go.
yeah, if it was a crew I didn't know at all, I'd probably have said something like exactly like that. And we're going to do it I really want you to make sure you're locked into the very first 2 inches of the stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to drive underwater, making sure that we're really well gripped, basically, and then building the speed every stroke. I would maybe use a description of something like a steam train that like chugga, 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 slowly builds up its speed, but has to like go chugga, 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 chugga. That's quite a nice way because people kind of get that analogy.
Definitely. I think it's nice to have some visualization, but at the same time, you've given them a way to do it, which I think is the difference. So that was a question from Susie. Does that cover your question, or is there anything else you wanted to add to that? I'll give Susie a chance to answer that. Thank you. Yes. Okay, cool. No worries. Does anyone else have any questions or any thoughts, anything they noticed they particularly liked or thought was cool in that recording? Feel free to unmute yourself as well. You don't have to drop it in the comments if you do want to speak. Give people a chance to type. I'm just going to read through my notes as well and see if there was anything else that I missed. No, I think I kind of covered everything. I think what you touched on the only other thing, which is there's some use of silent strokes. I think that's really important to acknowledge that even in pieces, it is possible to have a bit of silence. It doesn't have to be all kind of hammering the really loud and aggressive style of coxing every single stroke at 24. Powerful strokes, or it can be really powerful for a couple of strokes of silence, to just sit there and kind of let the last call you made land, let them digest it, make the change, and then to come back in with a really powerful piece of feedback. Either, okay, I need more of that, or that worked, now we're going to do this. Either way, you're either building on it or you're moving on, and that in itself is a bit of feedback.
Yeah, agreed.
Wicked. Okay, so I am now going to move on to the paddling recording that you sent me.
Yes, audio 5 or audio 12 or something.
Yeah, it's something very ambiguously named.
So I think this was a response. We'd had a lot of messages asking us to look at training recordings because I think most of the recordings that are out there are race recordings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you'll see here that a lot of this is silence. And again, I think this has got to be put in context. So this is the same season, 2016. This is later on in the year. So the crew are this is actually the Olympic crew. They're very familiar with each other. They're very familiar with me. And they are also elite athletes, so they don't really need me talking the whole time. I think if you have a more novice crew or a crew that's just starting out together, you are going to need to talk more. You're probably not going to allow. I mean, I've listened to recordings where I've been silent for like full minutes.
Yeah.
That's probably not going to work with a less experienced crew, but with this kind of level, it does work, and actually it gives them the time they need to make the changes that they're trying to make. So there are some quite big stretches of silence. Some of the stretches of silence are sometimes because the coach is talking, which you might not be able to hear. But if I listen to the recording, I can hear that the coach is talking, or I can hear that I've like stopped mid sentence or something. But yeah, I think there's definitely a huge area to be developed in most of the coxing recordings I listen to. Is just more space for the athletes to try things out and get things done.
Amazing. Right, okay. I think we are ready to go and listen to this recording. Can you see the traffic cone again? That tells me that we're ready to listen. Okay, right, we're going to listen to 2 minutes of this recording of a paddling session, and then we'll have a chat about it.
5 and 6 joining in. Ready, go. Want to look for that real simplicity. Straight up the hole. Body weight dead centered. So how simple you can make it. Focus on that stretch off the back. We want to be finding the feet here. Really set yourself over on those front two wheels. Coming with that simplicity, good. Keep continuous round the back. Focusing on holding that press through the heels here. Staying up in the glutes. Driving high with the hips. Yeah, and then you flow off the back. Continuous, not rushed. Elastic to find the feet.
I'm going to stop it there because I know that it's silent for the next 10 seconds. So we don't need to listen to silence. We can just, I'm telling you that the last 10 seconds of this recording is silence. Um, okay, amazing. Right, let's kick off with you, Zoe. What are your thoughts on that one?
So again, I think there was good use of silence. I was giving them time to work things out. And I think again, in that 2 minutes, I was pretty focused on one area more or less. So um, we were talking about sort of really getting over the back, off the back turn, getting the weight over into the feet, and then sort of gliding out to the front. And it was fairly sort of simplistically focused on that. I wasn't jumping around again between different areas. I think again, if I was gonna sort of do this bit again, I think I did give them one like, yeah, good, but I think maybe a little bit more feedback on, you don't need much because obviously it's only 2 minutes. Like you don't want to be saying, yeah, good every 10 seconds. But in 2 minutes, maybe a bit more about what we were doing, what we needed, what we weren't quite there with yet, what we needed to do differently, that sort of thing. Um, yeah, maybe it was just a little bit too devoid of that for my liking.
Yeah, that seems totally fair. I think my only negative note on that was pretty similar, which is maybe there was an opportunity to provide either some data feedback or a feeling. So yes, I felt that in the back of my seat, or
Yeah.
okay, we got another couple of inches between our puddle, like between our first and last puddles on that one, or something like that.
I love that. That would
Um,
have been great. Yeah.
just something that
Mm.
kind of gives a representation of the improvement or the change, or the okay, I didn't see as much of a change as I wanted to on that, so we're going to go again, because there's a few different ways that you're asking to achieve the same goal. So you start it off and you're asking them for that stretch off of the back, and then you pinpoint exactly where you want the change to happen, which I think is really good and important. And then you give them a few different ways that they could do that. So one rower might be able to do that through a little bit more through their hips, one through their heels, the different ways that you asked for it. But at no point was it, okay, yes, that was the one that made the difference. I
Mm.
think that probably would have been useful.
Agreed.
But yeah, I think ultimately you're giving them actionable changes and you're asking very specific things, not too much information in one go. So I actually think you stand a really good chance of getting the outcome that you're looking for. We just don't know that because we didn't hear it.
Mm.
Or see it because it's not a video. That's the other thing. It might have been really obvious in the boat that it felt better, and then that's fine if you're an experienced crew. But a less experienced crew will be really relying on that feedback, and I think that's just important to note. Oh, also, I wrote here, I love how you frame it almost like a challenge. If you've got a competitive crew, this works really well. You said, let's see how simple we can make it. So it's like setting them a task, setting them a challenge, and the competitive nature in a rower is really going to get fired up there. And then you give them a way to do it. So we've just been through all of that. You give them, okay, we're gonna make it simple by just stretching out the finish, and we're just gonna let the boat run, let the boat do some of the work. And I think it's really clear that you're all working together to that simple goal of making it really simple. And I think, yeah, that I really liked and appreciated that. I think that's a cool stylistic choice that clearly will have worked for your crew. Right, does anyone else have any thoughts? Drop it in the chat or unmute yourself, let us know. Um, yeah, love to answer questions. I just feel like I have to give people the chance to type because it would take me about 10 minutes to type a question myself. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Zoe, in the meantime?
No, I think, it's just interesting, like even listening back to these recordings so much later, um,
Mm,
I find it almost like annoying in a way because I'm like, oh, actually, I hear the things that I could have done better. I'm like, oh, I could have made this even better. I want to go back and do it again.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so I don't know how much of this, because I mean, I when I was scrolling through, I must have had about 40 or 50 hours of recordings just in that block um, of training, and there's no way I would have listened to it all. So I
Yeah.
always wonder if I've ever even listened to this bit before.
I actually love that. I think that's really nice. I've not really done that, and I feel like I should. Okay, we've got a few questions dropping in, so I'm going to read them. So Mia has asked, aside from listening to your own recordings, which is the best way to going over other people's coxing recordings that you want to take inspiration from, and how do you pick out things that you can add to your own coxing? I love this question because we often tell people don't just go on YouTube, watch a Henley final video and parrot everything that's said. Because, like we said at the beginning of the call, context is so important. And actually, I think listening to it and being able to take away, okay, clearly that call they made in that moment made a really big impact. So I need to find a way that I can create that moment for my crew, but it's then personalizing it. So it's sitting down with your crew and saying, okay, I want that magic moment that I know we're capable of. What's our technical focus? What's our strength that we can play on in that moment in the race? So you're taking inspiration from it, but you're also making it your own. I think that's the best way to do it, and you can apply that method to technical changes, to big pushes in a piece, and all sorts of things. What do you think, Zoe?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things on this. One is I find listening to other people's recordings really good to see how much variety of tone people use. And you
Mm,
listen to some people's race recordings and they're literally talking like this, like I
mm,
am right now. So
mhm,
calm, so relaxed. I'm like, oh my God, I could do that. Like I could bring some of that into my coxing.
mm,
Um, but the other thing I think that's really important, which is kind of what Autumn's saying, is the things that you say have to have context within your crew, but
mm,
they also have to feel authentic to come out of your mouth.
mm,
Um, and there's an example I always use. So people have probably heard me say this before, and I apologise for the swear words. But when I was looking at when I did the Oxford Reserve Crew for the boat race, we were looking at old boat race plans to start building our own. So we were looking at old ones just to kind of get a feel for what kind of structure people used and stuff like that. And the year before, I think the year before, or within the last couple of years, there'd been a Cox who was a American guy, and his big move that he called that they'd worked out together was that he would call badass motherfuckers. And I was like, okay, well, I can't say that because I would sound so stupid if I said that. Like it doesn't sound authentic in my accent. It doesn't sound authentic coming from me. It just sounds ridiculous. But I think what I kind of got from it instead was okay, but it's not the words that he's using. What
mm.
he's trying to do from that call is he's trying to give them a sense of whatever their crew personality is. Like that was how they wanted to feel. So that's what I then set out with. It's like, okay, how can I find a phrase or a call that makes my crew have the sense of that feeling that they want to encapsulate when they do that push.
Yeah.
So you have to find your own words. And sometimes, some people's calls do work for you. But yeah, you just have to be really careful because if I'd said that in a race, my crew would have just died laughing at me, I think.
Literally, yeah. So yeah, I think it is a case of picking and choosing. I think absolutely like nerd out on all of the videos that are out there. There is so much to look at and so much to listen to, and all of it will be valuable for various reasons. Sometimes it's what to do, sometimes it's what not to do. Sometimes you listen in and go, like what Zoe said, I can't pull that off. Or sometimes you go, actually, why aren't I doing that? Like, I could own that, I could do that, and I think my crew would love it, and it can give you inspiration in that way. But don't be afraid to sense check it. Like give something a go in training. And if it doesn't work and it doesn't land, okay, fine, you've learned from that and it might be embarrassing or whatever. But then at least you know. Um, but yeah, experiment and yeah, defo nerd out on listening. We have another question from Alex. Any thoughts on tonal variation during practice outings, especially long outings, to ensure rowers don't switch off? This is so good a question. It's definitely a problem we've all faced. What do you think, Zoe?
So I think there's a few things here. One is, yes, you need to find that. And
Mm,
I know we said at the beginning, listen to 2 minute chunks of recordings. But one thing that can be quite useful to do is play the whole hour of recording. But I would always do that when I was doing something else. So it wasn't my main focus. What I wanted is I kind of wanted it in the background because I wanted to see if I was just like monotoning it for an hour and a half, and I would just completely switch off from it, or if
mm,
things would catch me, like, oh, I changed my tone there, or I got a bit louder, or oh, I got really intense there. I whispered. Actually, whispering can be something that really draws
mm.
people in sometimes.
It doesn't
So
have to be from normal to loud. Any dramatic
any
change
change,
is
yeah.
interesting.
And I think the other thing that's really important in changing tone is giving yourself the silence to do it, because it's really difficult. And I'd say this is probably more important in racing than training, but for both. If you are talking constantly every single word, it is very difficult to change your tone. If you want to suddenly, you can kind of ramp up without really stopping, but then it's very difficult to come back down again. If
Mm,
you're shouting like this, suddenly stopping and talking really quietly is really jarring. So you
mm,
do need to give yourself a little bit of silence. And I don't mean, especially in a race, I don't mean much. I mean like 2 strokes. It's not very long. But you need to give yourself a bit of a breath so you can change.
mm,
I think a lot of it's about, in training, I would be thinking more about less about volume and more about intensity and urgency in your voice in
mm.
different parts of the outing. So you can add some intensity to bits without having to get any louder, or you can add like a sense of urgency to what you're doing. You can talk a little bit faster, or really using the emphasis. And I kind of did this to extreme in my coxing, and some people find it very uncomfortable and unnatural to do, because but I also do it when I just talk, because it's obviously something that's just part of how I is really using your words to emphasize the movements you're looking for. So, like, okay, we're going to drive with the legs, or right, I want it to be loose at the catch. So, those kinds of emphasis with your voice, like, they're really good in training. And I think they're much easier to use effectively, and to keep people's attention, than really having to force yourself to like really vary your sort of tone or volume too much.
Love that. I actually, that's so true that you use your voice like that. That's not something that I ever really used to do. I think it's a bravery thing. Like, I think I was always worried maybe of sounding stupid, but never do I listen to your recordings and go, why is she saying it like that? So I should have done that. Another thing that I always found helpful, and again, I learned this kind of from listening to other coxes, which is that finding and playing around with new ways to say things. So not necessarily like the length of the word that you're saying, like drive, but actually, when you're talking about balance, giving them a visual way to think about balancing. So I remember once learning from a cox called Adrian, and he told his crew that they needed to imagine that across their rigger there were like 5 wine glasses, and they had to not spill the wine glasses. So for a good like 20 minutes of that session, they were obviously focusing on not wasting a sip of wine, and not letting it wobble. And actually, that's a really interesting way to hold focus in a long session. So it's not necessarily even tone; it can also be the content of what you're saying, and giving them again a way to make the balance better, but a visual thing of it's important that you do this because we're not going to spill the wine might be kind of fun. So yeah, that's another thing to play around with maybe. We have one more question, and then I think we'll wrap things up. So, what different ways do you feel changes in the boat from the crew? Can you feel that these are affecting some individuals in the crew, not the whole crew, whether they're making positive changes that you're asking to happen or undesirable changes? How can you check in to the ways you feel how the boat is moving, and how do you give feedback to the crew? So, I think this kind of touches on what I was saying earlier when you need to be really specific about how you want someone to make a change. So when Zoe was saying, I want the outcome to be that we're going to stretch out the finishes, she was giving multiple ways that she might know the individuals in her crew might achieve that. It can be really difficult to know when an individual is making a technical change unless you're physically looking at their blade. The feel in your seat is unlikely to happen, and you'd be able to have the sensitivity to know exactly which person has made that change. I personally don't think that's very likely. Zoe might be able to correct me on that. I think it's more of a visual thing. So I can see that individual's body isn't rotating enough, or that individual's blade isn't locked on because I can see frothy water around their oar or something like that. So there are a little bit more visual cues for individuals. I don't know about you, Zoe. Is there anything else on that front?
No, I think that's a pretty good explanation of it. I think it's the whole boat feel aspect of things is a massive topic in itself. I mean, I think just going back to the beginning of that question about whether you can pick out individuals just through feel. I mean, I think that's quite difficult, but what you
Mm.
can do is you tie it in with things you're seeing, hearing, that sort of thing. So you kind of you might know that from what you can feel that someone's rushing, but you're not probably going to know. You'll know which side. You could know which side it is if it's a stroke side or a bow sider, but you're not going to know if it's the 3 seat or the 5 seat. But
Yes.
actually, if you then tie that in with looking at their oars, you might see that actually one is slightly out of time. So that it's kind of tying those things together, really. But
Mm.
I think, yeah, boat feel is a whole different ball game, and is a massive. It's probably one of the hardest things to learn.
And
Um,
describe. It's
describe,
something
yeah,
that
exactly.
ultimately just develops over time. The more different crews, the more different rowers you work with, you start to notice the different feelings that are consistent and the feelings that are wrong or inconsistent.
Yeah.
Hopefully that covers that a little bit. That was actually a really difficult question. So thank you for challenging us there, Susie. That was great.
There was a question that came through to me, but I'm not quite sure I understand the meaning. So basically, what you used explained with sort of the drive, like a longer word there, but
Mm.
how can you still keep the call snappy, keep them pushing while also taking time? I mean, I think for me,
Mm.
I don't want that call to be snappy because I want it. I don't want them to. I don't want them to snap. I want them to push long. So if I
Mm.
wanted a snappier call, I would use a different. First of all, I wouldn't be picking those movements to be talking about, but I would use sharper words, shorter words. Again, that urgency in my voice. Yeah, so I think I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but yeah, I
Well,
think
I think that does answer the question. It turns it a bit 180, but I think that is a really good point.
yeah, and you can still there's no call that needs to be that quick. If I wanted someone to really drive the legs, if I say drive the legs, that's one stroke's worth of talking. It's
Yeah.
not like it's not that
Yeah.
long.
And actually, sometimes, even on those kind of short, snappy strokes where you do maybe want something a little bit more punchy, they're probably going to be short syllable words anyway, like sharp or quick or
Yeah,
something like that.
and
So,
that's when you have to pick your words as well, because
mm,
if you want something to sound short or snappy, don't use really long words.
yeah,
And because that's something that often you hear someone trying to really, really rush loads of words into one little tiny bit of the stroke. But actually, you just need to think about how you can use fewer words, make it more succinct, and make it fit with the pattern that you're trying to emphasize a bit better.
sure. Yeah, awesome. Just a little comment there as well, just to follow up those questions, was thanks for the reminder to check all the senses and to value them all. I think that's so
I
crucial and
love
actually a
that.
really
Yeah.
nice thing to round this off with,
Yeah.
which is that things like boat feel or anything, it's never just one feeling, one factor. Boat feel means what you can hear, what you can see, what you can feel under your seat, under your feet, you know, what the water looks like, what the blade puddles look like, everything comes into it. And actually you can apply that to your recordings as well, which is that there are so many different things that make a good recording, and everyone's is going to sound different. And just because Zoe sounds one way, and that's what you might call a 10 out of 10 recording, I could submit a recording and it would sound completely different, but it might be rated a similar out of 10.
Mm.
But everyone's going to sound a little bit different, and coxing is quite subjective. And it's about working with the crew that's in front of you and making sure that you're constantly working to get the most out of them. And you're not just kind of shoving something down their throats because it worked for someone 10 years ago on YouTube. Right, is there, I can't see any more questions coming in, so I am happy to round it off there if you are, Zoe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Good.
If you enjoyed today's webinar, you can see there's a QR code on the screen currently. So that is an opportunity for you to buy us a coffee. So we always say these webinars, we do them for free. We like to share our knowledge. We like to make sure we're creating community, but we can only keep doing that and do things like paying for a Zoom membership if we have some sort of regular kind of income of some kind. And this is how we do it. So if you enjoy the webinar and you have a couple of pounds to spare, please do go on to that link and buy us a coffee.
And even more importantly, if you haven't already, check out our conference, Coxing Conference, which is coming up in November. If you go on our website, The Winning Cox, you can find it, or any of our social media. Tickets are available, but they are already half sold out. So if you want to come, you get on it.
Yeah, we've got some really exciting people coming along. Lots more announcements to be made over the next week. We sat down today and decided all of the topics that we're going to cover in our panels and our breakouts, and it's going to be really, really fun, even better than last time. So even if you came before, you definitely want to come again.
Fab.
Amazing. Hopefully see you there, guys. Good luck with head season, and always feel free to get in touch with us on social media if you have any questions in the meantime. But if not, we'll see you at the next webinar.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.